So we are now going to talk about the tension in a life of faith of never actually knowing for certain. What does it mean to believe if you can never know for sure? And what is the relationship between faith and knowledge? So we're going to look at three approaches to the gap between faith and knowledge. So we'll start out with prayer, La'asok b'divrei Torah, and I feel like La'asok b'divrei philosophia, that we're going to be involved in philosophy, but please join me in this bracha, which covers it as well. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, sovereign, who commands us to engage in study. Amen. Okay, so I think last week many people enjoyed being in Chavruta, and certainly that's a better way of learning from each other, with each other, than being spoken at. So we're going to break up into Chavrutot again, into study groups, but then we'll come back. I'm wondering if people could write down some questions so that you'll have them. I'm going to introduce the first three sources and give you background on them and some questions to think about when we do the actual chavruta. And chavruta is going to be in groups. And okay, does anyone have any comments, questions, thoughts? Okay. So this is a pretty well-known text, the text of Kohelet, of Ecclesiastes. And who do we say who wrote it? Anyone knows who we say who wrote it?
King Solomon.
King Solomon. But academics believe it was written during the Hellenistic time, so much later. And really, the whole book discusses our human beings' search for the understanding of humanity and of God. It's really about the meaning of life. And it describes a thinking person and a life that it's experiencing, and how our experiences and our knowledge help us to understand both God and knowledge in the world. So it's probably one of the least understood books. It's quite philosophical. And in it, the author of the text, who we don't know who it is, because what we do know is that we don't think it's King Solomon, but the author admits that ultimate understanding is beyond us. That ultimate real understanding is beyond human capabilities. So questions about this are, how did it end up in the canon? In the Bible, because every book that's put in the Bible had to be debated. Would this make it into the Bible? So the questions that I'd love for you to think about, you're going to read this and try to think about what it means. And then here's some questions. How do you understand placing this admission of the impossibility of knowing the purpose of life or of God's existence in the Bible? Why is it here? How to get there? And do you think that faith and knowledge are distinct? Do you think we can only know what we can see or prove? And why or why not? So these are questions that you're going to have while encountering just these two very small verses, but very large verses. Again, these are three different texts that give us different approaches to the gap between faith and knowledge.
Can you put the questions in the chat if that's
Yes, I
possible?
can.
Great.
Once it starts, I can.
Wonderful.
Right, Suzanne? I'll be able to do that. Okay. Suzanne, if we're broken out into chat rooms, will I be able to put it in the chat and everyone sees it?
I believe so.
Okay, we'll try that. Good.
Yep.
Okay. So the next text is clearly one of my favorite. And you could all give the introduction because you've heard this text many, many times. It's from the book of Pirkei Avot. It's the opening to Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers or the Ancestors. And it's the first book in the Oral Torah that speaks about what it means to be a good person. And it's debated in the book. There are answers that conflict with each other. But really, we're going to read about the chain of transmission of Torah. This text is going to give us the idea that knowledge can be based on tradition. I don't need to have something proven. I just know that my ancestors knew it, and their ancestors knew it, and their ancestors knew it. So now we have two different kinds of ways of thinking about this gap between knowledge and faith. And this is a question. This is my favorite question. Suzanne and I were thinking about this together. So here's a question we're going to ask you to think about and share with your chavruta. What knowledge in your life is based on your own experiences and observations? And what knowledge do you consider to be based on truths that you've been taught by others? So again, I'll put them in the chat. Okay, so the third text I think is the most interesting. And it offers a third idea, a different idea of how we approach the idea of faith and knowledge. And what we're going to think about is knowledge absolute, getting to somewhere, or are we always changing our knowledge and adding to it and adding to it? Do we celebrate seeking knowledge, or do we celebrate finding knowledge? This gentleman, anyone know Arnold Ehrlich? You wouldn't know him. He died in 1919 in America, but he was from Poland. He wrote a book called Mikra Kifshuta, which I think is funny for those of you who read it in Hebrew also, because it means the simple understanding of the Torah. So he's trying to give you the simple understanding of the Torah. I actually think there's nothing simple about his understanding of this piece of Torah. So this piece of Torah is from Exodus, and it is the place in Exodus where we're told that we don't see God's face. Lo yirani ha'adam v'chai. We don't see God's face, but we only end up seeing God's back, meaning we don't have full knowledge of God ever. So he was also a modern biblical scholar, and he wanted to bring biblical criticism into the conversation. So this is not a yeshiva work. This is more of a scholarly work. These are our first three texts. We may or may not get to the other texts, but the idea behind these is to have a discussion about the difference between knowledge we have and faith that we have, and that uncertainty in between. I will put the questions in the chat, but does anyone have anything they want to add or ask? And I'll see if I can answer. We had thought to set up like a half an hour, 25 minutes, but Suzanne and I will pop around to rooms and see how people are doing if we want to shorten that at all. And thank you for being here. And I will say that in this week of gratitude, I am grateful that there are people who want to think about what it means to live with faith with each other. And so, Suzanne, you're going to send us in groups. Once everyone is in the groups, I will start to type the questions in. And thank you for being here. Good. Okay, we're all back. It's good to see everyone. Hope you had some lively discussions. We're going to start with the first text, the text from Kohelet. The text said to have been written by King Solomon, but probably written by a Hellenistic Jew who someone influenced by Hellenism and logic, and
Struggle. Struggle is to,
philosophy.
yeah.
Yeah.
He's
So,
looking if to be influenced or not.
wait, what did you say? I didn't hear.
He's saying this guy is struggling to be influenced by the Hellenistic or no?
Yeah. But we think he knows Hellenism.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is why we don't think it was written much earlier by
Right.
Melech Shlomo, by King Solomon.
Right.
So before I bring back the questions, can anyone from your chavruta share some of the things that came up for you, knowing that what we're discussing is the gap between faith and knowledge? We're just the first text gives us one way of thinking about the gap between faith and knowledge. Someone want to read it out loud for us? Kol zot nisiti b'chokhmah.
Oh,
Someone do it in English? No, in English is fine.
All this I tested with wisdom. I thought I could fathom it, but it eludes me. The secret of what happens is elusive, and deep, deep down, who can discover it?
Okay, so I'm going to take the round. I only see Eleni's hand up. So our teacher, oh, no, I see Paul. So Eleni and then Paul.
So we had a great discussion in our group, and I think one of the things that came up in our group, and I'll depend on Roberta and Ellen if I got it wrong, is that we saw not so much a gap, but there are different arenas of knowledge. And and if you need to know how to boil an egg, there's a way to boil an egg, and there's no gap anywhere. But these kind of deeper questions just have a different way of being approached. I hope that captures it and sort of concisely.
Say that again. I'm not sure I heard it right.
So Ellen and Roberta can jump in and help me, but I think we
Okay.
said there's sort of different arenas of knowledge. And so there's some kinds of knowledge that has evidence and has a foundation, and there's other things that don't. And it's not so much a gap, it's that those are two different universes.
Some things are you can empirically know because they're not, I mean, that's going to be a little bit more of the next one. Are you saying like it depends upon the question if knowledge applies?
Yes, it depends on the kind of question and the tools you bring to discern what that you have to discern what kind of question you're asking, whether it's an answerable one or not.
Okay, but so for this kind of question, is there a way of knowing?
I think the text says no, it eludes me.
Anyone want to jump in and give a different reading or say, I agree with that, Paul? Paul, we can't hear you. Maybe other people can. I can't.
No, he's still on mute.
Unmute.
Yeah.
I just asked him to unmute. I don't know if that works.
There we go. Sorry.
Yeah, good. No,
Um,
no, sorry.
Well, there are a couple of us who are scientists in this group, and one the spouse of a mathematician. So from maybe you guys jump in and tell me if I have this right, but from the position of a mathematician, faith is kind of irrelevant because you get as close as you can get to truth by mathematical reasoning, and then what's really logical, and what's really logical is truth. That's one way of looking at it. From a point of view of a scientist, you can know what you see, you know what you can see from scientific method, and that is knowledge. You know what you see, you know it. But to know what the deeper meaning is and to know beyond that, or certainly to know anything about ethics, um, uh, that's not something that you see. You can think, you can theorize, you can have wonderful theories about what the universe is all about, but unless you've seen every little bit of it, then you don't know the truth. So what's the role of faith in here? Is there any role of faith in the work of a scientist? From my perspective, the role of faith is if there's no truth out there, why try to find it? You can
Oh,
get as close as you can get by observation. I think that's a little bit what the passage was about, really, right? Is you can do your best to try to get close to the truth, to the real absolute truth. But and so from my personal perspective, I think anybody who thinks they really know the truth is somebody I can't trust.
I, I, I mean, I think you said that a little bit in jest, but I actually think many people on this would agree with you that most of us are scared by people who have an absolute faith, who are always certain.
I personally feel much more comfortable substituting the word faith with the unknown. So there is knowledge that takes you so far, and beyond that knowledge that we can empirically find and check in the lab is the unknown. And that boundary moves, every day the human knowledge grows and the unknown recedes. And I feel much more comfortable with that substitution. Faith for me is something you're jumping into it's a leap of faith as the expression goes, right?
Correct. Yes.
Right. So
And so once you get to knowledge, once you have the knowledge, then faith isn't part of the equation.
well, I struggle with the expression faith. Faith is a little bit
Emunah.
yeah, no, I know what it means, but it's zav. It's doesn't fit me personally.
Okay,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
works to say lo matim. It's
yeah,
not something
yeah.
that fits me. And yeah, okay, I'm gonna keep my opinion last.
No, that's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, Arnold.
So I mean, faith is the unknown, basically. But right, what you don't know or what you don't have proof for, you contribute to that bucket called faith.
Maybe unless we're talking about belief in a God and in a some people say higher power, which at least our third text is going to say we don't ever get to the point of knowing. It keeps moving. We'll never fully know.
It will always stay within the unknown. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Our
I think
group kind of had that feeling that uh, God eludes us, and that we that first source was something that could have been written within the past 10 years. It's very much modern thinking. We also talked about how sometimes things that we
wait,
believe.
1 second, Arnold, did that surprise you then that the book is this old?
No, well, I knew all about it. I've had that feeling reading a lot of Jewish texts. I get that feeling this could have been written yesterday, including a lot of Maimonides' writings. And yeah, so another thing we talked about, how things that we start to learn can often flip-flop between faith and fact. Like when you first get to know a person, you kind of form an impression, and that's really faith because you don't really know the person, but you might like the person or dislike them right away. And then as you learn more facts, your opinion of that person could flip-flop. And then as you get more facts, you'll flip-flop again. So, when do you really know the person? You're never sure, but you're flip-flopping between faith and fact. And which raised what the scientists mentioned raised another question for me just a few minutes ago. Like I know that the sun rises on one side of my house and it sets on the other side of my house. So I'm only trusting science. I have faith in science that it's true that the Earth goes around the sun, but I don't see it. As far as I'm concerned, if I'm just going by what I see, the facts that I see, it's probably a different sun every day. And boy, there goes another one. It's another day and it's another sun. And obviously the Earth is flat to me. So anything to the contrary that I'm told by the scientists, I'm really taking on faith.
I don't think they take it on faith. They
Right.
have observations, more sophisticated observations than our observations, unless we happen to be astronomers.
Right, they
I
can see it. Even
I
if
want
I
to say something.
can't see it, they can see it.
I want to say something. I think we are mixing chokhmah with emunah. This sentence, this phrase is for wisdom, not for emunah. You can have emunah without chokhmah. And you cannot assign it for emunah because it says, as you believe more, it goes far away from you. And it's the opposite. When you have emunah, the more you learn about emunah, the more close you come to the emunah. So I think this is only applicable to chokhmah, to wisdom, not to emunah.
What's the definition of emunah in English?
Faith.
Faith.
But even with chokhmah, which you would think is a little bit more concrete than emunah, it's still elusive. Chokhmah should be able to be understood more than emunah. But even that, Kohelet says, even that eludes me. Yeah, Michelle.
So, I mean, I think what's interesting about this is not that we know what wisdom is, but the fact that there's always a striving for something that is deep, whether it's deep within, whether it's deep out there where science is trying to find the boundaries, but that testing and thinking about that is sort of as part of our lives, trying to understand, where we are and what we don't know.
So the question is, why is this in the Bible? What made this kind of book need to be in the Bible? And we can't wait till Leora Batnitsky's book comes out about it. She's writing it on this book. Why did it make it in?
To show us how limited we are and how that we can't understand a lot of life or of that, on one hand, we are getting a lot of maybe instructions and laws, but that there's also a real limitation to humans versus God.
Or what is knowable to me now? What is knowable to me later? Lenny.
Yeah, I think it also gives a context for having these discussions, that it's legitimate, it's worthy, it's valuable to ask these questions and to talk about them. We're not required to go around acting like we know things we don't know, or that we think we have the authority to declare something that we have no evidence for. It invites conversation.
And invites and lets us know that it's okay to not be certain.
And it's wise. wisdom is wisdom itself. I mean, what do they say? The older you get, the less you know. As you get a bit wiser.
Janet in our group mentioned that she found that comforting, that not having. Janet, I don't mean to paraphrase your comments, but it some she used the word comforting, not to have to know.
Basically, that it gave us permission because we can't know. And this then gives us the permission that it's okay that we can't know. And I find that comforting.
I find it comforting as well. I think just want to make one little tikkun. It's not that we can't know. It's we don't yet know. I'm not sure. Like you may learn some point, but for Kohelet, it eludes him now, but maybe not always, or then he might stop asking the question.
But I don't think man is necessarily capable of knowing God. And so it's
well, here it's knowing wisdom, but yes, and God. Okay. But I agree that it's comforting, certainly. Welcome, Lee.
Hello.
Dr. Karp.
Dr. Karp is long retired. If anybody needs a doctor, they should, let's see, who should they call? I'm not sure who else is a
I
physician.
don't know. Someone fell in shul
we may
last
have a PhD there. You'd probably do
No,
better.
someone fell in
Any
shul
case.
last week, and you were the only one there. So it was good.
All right. Okay. I think one of the warning, there's a certain warning, and whether it's contained in this passage or not, but as you know, we sometimes refuse to see things that we don't believe in. If we don't believe that something is possible, we literally will not see it. We'll just go blinded and blind until somebody holds us by our ears and say, look at this. Like sometimes it's look at what you're doing. What are you doing? Well, of course I'm doing it this way. This is the way I believe you should do it. And of course, it takes a terrific effort to see something that you have no faith in.
We have to
That may
leave.
be a part of warning in this.
Can you, maybe because the day is long and yesterday was long as well, can you give us a little more concrete example of what you mean?
Can I give a more concrete example?
Because I think it will help people.
Well, I mean, we have the political examples right in front of us. I mean, the people who have, I'm not saying anyone knows exactly what happened, and it could have worked the other way, but why this wonderful message that I have is not being heard? Because you're not capable of seeing what the needs or the feelings or the perceptions of other people, because you have such faith in your own beliefs and your own traditions that you're blind. That may be what happened with this very good person on Monday night, because I know the person's a wonderful person, just was blinded to what I was shocked when I heard what happened, because it seemed so surprising that it may be that he was blinded to what he was doing, blinded by his own faith in his own goodness, perhaps. But I've done it many times myself and unable to see what other people are seeing.
Thanks. Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in on this text? So Kohelet really is trying to observe and experience life so he can understand its purpose in life and God's role in life. And we mirror Kohelet, we do the same. And one of the things that we see in this particular passage is that, as someone said right at the beginning, ultimate understanding may just be beyond us. First way of looking at it. Everyone willing and ready to go to the second short text? Okay. So love this text. And the question though, first before we jump into the text, does anyone have anything they wanted to say or a great Chiddush that you found with your group about Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai? Moses got the Torah at Sinai and gives it to Joshua, and Joshua to the Zkinim. And anything come up for any of you before I ask a question about it?
Well, our group was considering this as the role of tradition in our lives, of carrying on what Jews before us have carried on at great risk to their lives and in great pain and very poor circumstances. And so that tradition becomes very sacred to preserve in our own lives and carry on.
I didn't like it because it implies that the Torah was passed until the Great Assembly and did not pass to us, to the people.
Okay. That's an interesting piece, except they were the inheritors of the Great Assembly. But yeah, I think that when I've read or taught this text in other contexts, I actually think of the text as almost the opposite of that, as the way that we convince people that the rabbis had Torah. Because, right, the rabbis of the age of the Mishnah were doing Judaism new and differently from how it had been done during the time of the temple. So politically, they had to convince their co-religionists that what they were saying was also Torah. Does that work for you a little better? That it seems like that's what the sentence is doing.
So, Rabbi, I
Yeah.
had always thought that the Great Assembly here was the Sanhedrin, but Fred Elliman, who has dropped out of this, looked it up while we were talking, and the Great Assembly apparently was like 400 years prior to Moshe has a point here. What happened? I mean, it wasn't even contemporary with the Mishnah. You know,
So-
there you could say, well, we went up to here, and
So they always write that they got it that generation before, and then they consider themselves the rabbis as the ones who are studying it. But that it did go to the people that they inherited this from. They're making that jump, that what was the Great Assembly now in Jerusalem now lives in the north of Israel in Yavne. I hear what you're saying, but the way or in my study, the way they saw it is that Great Assembly is now the Great Assembly we hold up here in this small town called Yavne, not the Grand Jerusalem. So I see how historically, yes, what you're saying, but they're actually writing this to connect themselves to that.
again, that's what I thought, which is why I had always interpreted the men of the Great Assembly to be the Sanhedrin or whoever they were by the time they were putting down the Gemara. But historically, apparently, it's like 400 years earlier. I'm not disagreeing with your interpretation here, and I will continue to live with that. But I was very surprised by that.
Well, the issue is that the guys who wrote the Mishnah, the Tanaim who wrote the Mishnah, they're closing the Mishnah at 200 of the Common Era. But
Right.
the rabbis who were involved in that, the generations go back several hundred years. So these people who ended their writing and edited by year 200, there's generations of rabbis who do stretch back. That better? Maybe not. Okay. Someone else. Yeah, Michelle.
I mean, I felt like, I mean, you can only go up through generations if you're writing a book and or an oral book through where you are. But I mean, it's suggesting that it went through really that the tradition went through many transformations. I mean, the prophets were different than the men of the Great Assembly and the rabbis. I mean, so it suggests that there's a path for tradition, and we can be part of that too. You're not stopping at his place in history that you're living.
For tradition and transformation of the transmission.
Right.
Transmission always got transformed, which could mean that the truth here always gets transformed. By the way, that would be true today, because the way we read many things in the Torah today is much different than you would have read it even 30 years ago, 25 years ago. We notice when I'm studying with bar bat mitzvah kids and we're translating things, I notice that the way things are translated just would never be done today. Certainly in terms of gender. People don't, in English today, academics don't gender God. But even the Eitz Chaim version is gendered. And it's only like, 25, 30 years old, 40 years old? Transformed. The tradition got transmitted, but somehow transformed. And Michelle, you're saying that's a good thing, right? Oh, you turned off. I can't hear you. Yeah.
Yes.
She was agreeing with you.
Yes.
Okay.
So, I mean, I see this as a parallel to the beginning of the Amidah, where we say, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, God of Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. In that, it's again drawing on tradition.
Yeah, and much of what we call faith, or how some people address faith, and the gap between the faith and knowledge is, I know this is my tradition. My grandfather did it, my father did it, I do it.
But in a different way.
Okay. Okay, so Gila, anything else? And then Eleni, and then Arnold.
So as I understand that, it's every generation has changed what they got, but if you take it back all the way down, somehow you'll get to the source. It's kind of, if the rabbis of this time said it, it's kind of apologize. Yeah, we are changing. Yeah, we're changing a lot, but deep inside, it's getting back to where we come from.
What text does that remind you all of that we did? Suzanne, you want to go?
Sure. From the Talmud from the first day.
From Rabbi Akiva, right?
Yeah. Where not being able to follow their arguments, Moshe was ill at ease, but when they came to a certain subject and the disciple said to the master, "From where do you know this?" The latter replied, "It's a law given to Moses at Sinai," and Moses was comforted.
That we feel some sense of, we get our faith and our knowledge from tradition, even though I can't prove it. And even though it's changed. So I think Eleni was next, and then Janet. And yeah.
So what I love about this first verse from Pirkei Avot about the transmission is that I think as a literary document, it's asserting there's continuity in discontinuity. I mean, the temple's destroyed, the other temple's destroyed, and here we are. We're still passing down a tradition. There's still continuity in spite of or despite tremendous discontinuity. so much discontinuity that it's unbelievable that we're still here. And maybe we could say that today too. So I think it's saying something big rather than literal and small.
Yes. Yes. So one of the, oh, there were more people who said they were going, thank you. More people were going to talk before I jumped in. Yeah, Janet, thank you.
So I just have a question actually, because so that I'm seeing there's two ways we can interpret it. One is that it was given in its entirety, handed down generation to generation. It was given in some way, and each generation changed it and modified it for that generation. What does the Gemara say
Well,
on this text?
The Gemara doesn't comment on this, and in fact, there's no Gemara on this one book of Mishnah, which is odd in itself. But it's the Gemara acts on other subjects that the Torah is actually changeable. And we know this because we know that there are verses in the Torah that say things like, you should kill your son who is how do you say it in English? Ben Sorer Moreh.
Rebellious.
Rebellious, yeah, thanks. You should kill your rebellious son, and yet no one thinks that you should kill your rebellious son. So it's changed in every generation. Not spelled out, it was just done that it was changed in each generation. Even their conception of God as being, angry, that changes later in the Torah. God, not in the Torah, in the Bible, God becomes compassionate as opposed to angry. God grows. So we don't have this exactly, but we see how it's done, how in every generation the Torah is interpreted in different ways. What the ancient rabbis who put this system together, this Pharisaic system together, would say is that there was written Torah and oral Torah. And the oral Torah was whispered down from ear to ear to ear, but every person who heard it differently and understood it differently because of the time they were in, because of what they had learned. Does that seem okay? Does anyone want to add to that? Okay, so I have, okay, Arnold, then I have one question.
Yeah. Our Chavruta had pretty much consensus that this passage in the Pirkei Avot was used as justification for the rabbis having authority as Torah interpreters. But then in modern times, we've kind of all extended it to ourselves, and it's kind of it's symbolized in the synagogue at the bar bat mitzvah service, where the rabbi hands the Torah to the grandparents, who passes it to the parents, and then on to the bar mitzvah person. That's the Torah. It's not just, it's Jewish tradition, you could say, but
the learning. The larger than question for each of us, for all of us, is what knowledge in your life is based on your own experiences or observations? Where does that knowledge come in versus what knowledge do you have because someone taught you a truth? So maybe that's your mother, your father, your teacher, your grandma, your rabbi, someone, not me, someone. So just think about for a moment, which are the pieces in life in your own knowledge? We don't have to share, but we can think about for ourselves. What do we know? Because we know it in our kishkas and in our head and in our heart. And what do we know because it gets passed down? Oh yeah, Sally, did you want to talk? But you're on mute.
Well, in our group, Jane suggested that much of child rearing is we get from our family, handed down from parents and so on.
with much in how a child they get it from their parents. But child rearing now, many parents say, I don't like how I was raised. And so they try to change their way of child rearing.
But in a way, that's passed down too, because you're reacting to what went on before, what happened to you.
The numbers on the right exclude 6 possible.
Anyone want to jump in on that? And if you don't, that's okay. It's a really personal question to think about what knowledge is based on your own experience and observation versus what are truths that you've been taught. Well, I'll give you one because I think about this often. The truth that I have been taught is that all people are good. All people have goodness in them. My observation and experience tells me something different. But we still teach that. You're not going to not teach, and you're not going to not teach that. I mean, we teach everyone's created in God's image, even the murderers. Yeah. Sally.
Yes, I like that teaching about everyone was created in God's image. And like you, I was taught and grew up thinking that everyone was good. And I think I was probably in law school before I perceived a different reality. So I taught my children something different. And it comes from a book, a simple book called People by Peter Spire. And it says, or he says, most people are good and kind and well-meaning, but some people are none of those things.
All people on this Zoom are good and kind and well-meaning. Thank you. So, Bob Karp, and then we're going to go to what I consider to be the most interesting of all the texts.
If you look at different contexts, people in different contexts be wonderful and gentle with the people they know, and to be cruel and harsh and hostile to people for whatever category of people are rejected. And I think we're all caught up in that. Sometimes are cruel and not by intention. So I would say it may not be a entirely universally relevant comment to think, are people good? And because good is just good, I'm not sure, but to actually look at the conditions in which they are living and ask yourself, what are they doing in that circumstance? Because the cruelest people on earth can be very good parents, and the kindest people on earth can be dreadful parents.
Absolutely. Then I would, this was only my illustration of when I think of what do I learn from observing the world and what do I learn from just taking the truth from the previous generation. So I'm wondering if anyone has an example of that. Suzanne and I earlier were trying to think of examples. What are the things that we just, our faith teaches us this and it's passed from one generation to the next versus what I see or experience in the world? Those are two different kinds of ways of coming at faith. All right, well, keep thinking about it. If you think of something at 3 a.m., text me. My text won't go off at night. My WhatsApp does, though. So if you really need me, WhatsApp me. So yeah.
I don't have an answer to your question, because the question I find makes an either or, and I just think that any kind of knowing has to be personal in some way because it's my brain.
Well,
So
True.
the question, I'll leave it at that. I think it's a
Okay.
challenging question, so I'm trying to parse it in my own mind. I don't know if that's helpful to anyone else.
A rejection of the question. That's good because it's too polarized. Too polarized.
I didn't say rejection.
A tikkun.
No, it's just it presupposes a maybe distinction that I find it difficult to figure out.
I accept that. Okay, we're going to go to the last text or the third text, which is again based on a verse from Exodus 33, that we see only God's back. This Arnold Ehrlich lived in Poland and America. He died in 1919, and he was a modern biblical scholar, used biblical criticism. And why does he think, I mean, clearly he thinks process is more important than outcome. And how did your groups deal with this one? And how does it differ maybe from the orientation of Ecclesiastes or the Mishnah?
I can interpret it still as validating the scientific process.
You're taking it back to the scientific process and validating that it's about the process.
Yeah, it's a process by which you get as close to truth as we as human beings can get.
Right. So his understanding is we're never going to get really to God.
Right.
God is much bigger than we'd ever be able to understand.
We're never
Much
going to get to the absolute truth.
But what we should be getting to is the search for it. The asking of the questions, the looking for truth. Anyone have anything they want to add to that, to his beautiful way of saying this? I love this line at the end. Therefore, a human cannot see the face of God. Only God's back is shown to the God-fearing, so they will study and search out and infer things about God's face from the back. Thus you will always strive all their days to know God with a full and clear knowledge, because it's the striving to know, not the actual knowing. Maybe we say that because we can never know, so we say that the striving is better. I'm not sure. Michelle.
I mean, in here, though, he speaks of, he sort of says the search for truth is not going to get you anywhere. What's going to get you anywhere is your experience of life on earth, but like living it in a way that coincides with something that you do think is true, but not necessarily God, but maybe.
Well, I mean, I think he says, if I were to be given the choice of one or the other, I would choose the search.
For truth, but he doesn't say what truth is, really.
Correct.
But we don't know what the truth is.
I think that goes back to what we said at the very beginning, that anyone who tells you they know the truth, that they're right, will run the other way. Because you have to discover it. It can't be guaranteed the truth. You have to learn it on your own. You have to find your own truth.
And all of you who are parents know that about your children. Right? They have to find their own truth. They can't live yours.
I mean, you teach children your values, but they have to make their own decisions. They may know what your truth, what your values and truths are, but they make their own decisions.
So we're going to stop here for a moment. Okay, go ahead, Moshe. Then we'll move on.
I think a picture is worth more than 1,000 words. And I guess we strive to know how God looks like. And this is a justification why we don't see God.
Yeah, right. The seeing God, this is really a metaphor for knowing God. I can only see God's back. It's not really God's countenance. What I really want is God's countenance. But the Torah says you won't see God's countenance and live. It's too much.
No, I'm going more physically. I'm saying that I really want to see God. In other words, if I know his existence, then I can believe in him. And he's trying to explain why it's not important. And the process is more important.
It's interesting. I see in this text that that those who are God-fearing will see God's back.
Yeah.
That's not a negative thing. Like if you're not God-fearing, you won't see anything at all. But if you are God-fearing, you're going to get this glimpse. It's not maybe the glimpse you want, but you're going to, I think that's a very interesting.
It
So
happened to me.
what?
It's a metaphor, of course, but it's sort of if you have a predisposition to believe that there's a God, you're going to see the back
A
as
glimpse.
a metaphor.
Metaphor.
Feel something, glimpse something. If you're totally turned off to it and I'm not looking for it, that's harder. I think it's Sally, then Moshe, then we're going to move on to something a little more really contemporary. Yeah.
For me, you can see God in the moments of relating with love to other people, or they're, in that way.
So for you, it is the experience of relationship.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Partly, anyway.
The last two readings we're not going to do now, but I have them for you to think about over the weekend. And I'm happy that it's before Thanksgiving because they bring up the question of the relativity of truth and how in our own country in the last almost 10 years, that sense of truth has been shaken a bit. And so these are each interesting texts to maybe think about. Maybe if you have people coming to your Thanksgiving meals who really don't agree with each other, but also don't agree on facts, it might be interesting to read one of these texts. The first one, The Death of Truth, written in 2018, really, Deborah List observed in denying the Holocaust has the potential to alter dramatically the way established truth is transmitted from generation to generation. And we are living in that time where established truths are now questioned. Sometimes that's good for us, oftentimes not. But it is an interesting, were I to have Seder at my Thanksgiving table, that this is a paragraph that I would love people to think about. Or the next one. About political norms and perceptions. I want to end by saying thank you.